everyone, this is Lomi, and I recently decided to try something new for making doll eyes. Textured iris eyes are really popular now, and I had a hard time finding any that had a small iris, so I figured I'd have to make my own. Normally, textured eyes are made with colored clay inset into the eye, but I wanted to see if I could get a similar effect by digitally sculpting a base that already had the texture, and then painting it or coloring with pastels. These are picking up some leather bits from my last project, but they'll be wiped off before they're done, so just ignore that. Also, you can probably tell, but I was finally able to get a new camera. Now you can see the damage this hobby does to my cuticles up close. Creativity is hard on the hands, seriously. I printed small iris eyes in two sizes, 14 and 12 millimeters. I printed them with Elegoo ABS-like 3.0 resin in white and cured them in my new-to-me mercury wash and cure station. Then it was time to start. I began with pastels. The 3D printed resin has a lot of tooth to it, so I was hoping the pastel would stick to it well without needing any sealant added, and I'd say for the most part it does. But that also means you have to be extra careful to clean the eyes after you're done blushing because the powder goes everywhere. So a lot of the surface of this eye ended up kind of green. In order to build up color, I add a little bit of matte medium on top of the pastel dust, just sort of dabbing it on so it will seal the pigment but not brush any of it away. While those are drying, I prepare to try another pair using gouache paints. Acrylics would work well for this too, but they can be tough to clean up if something goes wrong, so I wanted to stick to something that would be easy to clean up if it turns out horrible. At least until I'm more familiar with painting these new eye bases. With the gouache, I start with my darkest color and thin the paint down with water because I want the color to flow into the texture. I wasn't sure if it was flowing as well as I wanted, so I added more water to make the paint more runny, and the second eye didn't turn out as well. It was counterintuitive to want a thicker paint so it'd flow better, but that's part of why we experiment, so we can learn how different materials behave under different situations. Gouache has a pretty translucent quality when heavily thinned, but can be very opaque when less water is used. I decided to use the different paint viscosities to help me layer it. The thicker the paint, the less it blends. So I barely thinned my lightest green at all to ensure it would be opaque and sit on the surface of the other colors. While those dried, it was time to go back to the pastel ones for a second layer. I hoped to do something similar with these, mixing different colors to get varying depth, but the pastels just didn't build up the way I hoped on the surface. So I figured I'd abandon that and add gouache over the top to get the look I wanted. I coated them with matte medium again and went back to the gouache pair while it dried. The difference I got with gouache was just so impressive. A darker ring around the outer edge instantly changed the results I was getting, and it was shaping into what I wanted very easily. So I figured I'd just stick with paints for these kind of eyes from now on. If I wanted single color eyes, maybe pastels would be okay, but I was after more color variation. Since these paints will be easy to clean up before the eyes are domed, I didn't worry about trying to get the edges perfect, so the painting part looked a little messy sometimes and made me nervous, but it's all about trusting the process. With the confidence I gained from the green ones, I started a pair of larger blue ones and was immediately happy with the paint consistency I was able to get. It did exactly what I wanted, covering well but leaving darker spots in the textured parts. I dabbed varying shades of blue on top to add interest and depth, and then I wiped the edges of all the eyes with a wet paintbrush to remove any extra paint, but apparently I didn't record that part. Still learning to use the new camera and get the right settings. Once the eyes were dry, they needed to be sealed before I could dome them with clear resin, so I coated the irises with some Vallejo matte varnish. It would be nice if I could get this to focus. Like I said, still learning to use it. Like with the matte medium, I just dabbed the varnish on because it's wet enough to reactivate the gouache, and I didn't want to ruin my hard work. It can go on thick, and while it's really milky at first, it dries beautifully clear. I gave it plenty of time to dry, then began the dome using UV resin. I knew the deep spot for the pupil would be prone to creating bubbles, so I used a dotting tool to add resin to the edges of those little holes a little at a time, allowing it to flow down into the pupil on its own. This prevented any bubbles from forming in that spot. I was a little unsure if it was warm enough for this, as resins can be very temperature sensitive, but I hoped for the best. Once the pupils were filled, I added a drop of UV resin to each eye to create the cornea, then cured it. Unfortunately, my temperature fears were true, and while it's hard to see with how shiny the eyes ended up being, it was cold enough that the UV resin developed a bunch of super tiny bubbles when it cured. So while I was disappointed that these weren't perfect, the results I got let me know my new approach was going to work fine as soon as the weather warmed up. The green ones ran a bit, but that'll be easy to fix, and while these eyes aren't perfect, I think they're good enough to use for now. The bubbles almost look like glitter in the light, so they add a bit of extra sparkle. The green ones were designed specifically for tall, so I tried them in an extra head I cast that I still need to finish sanding. The fit is perfect, and the smaller iris was exactly what he needed. This makes me really excited to try again for a perfect pair later on. The blue ones were for Vaughn, my Eaglehouse SID, and while he's been wearing some acrylic blues my daughter Evie and I made together, I think the smaller iris suits him a lot better. It's much more focused and realistic, and the color is so vibrant. Overall, even though this experimental set didn't turn out perfect, I think these are a great option for easy-to-make eyes. I've uploaded the file to Thingiverse, and there's a link in the video description, so feel free to download them and print some bases to make eyes of your own. That's all for today, though. Thanks for watching. Bye.